everybody, it's your favorite gentleman, Marcus Norman of Gentleman Style Podcast Show. And today you all are in for an absolute treat. Today we are going to talk about one of my favorite subjects. One of my favorite topics is real estate. And this man coming to the stage is going to help us take our real estate game to the next level. You won't want to miss 1 second of this powerhouse speaker as we dive right in. Here we go. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It is your favorite gentleman, Marcus Norman of the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. And today I have coming to the stage Mr. Axel, who is a retired Air Force officer. Thank you for your service to our country, sir. Mr. Axel started his first company in 2005, focusing on consulting, employee skill development, and program management. These areas remain in place these days and have grown internationally. He's also a business owner who began thinking about applying profits towards retirement. And research indicated that owning tangible assets would be the best way to accomplish that. It's also the path that the government supports the most, which led him to develop a residential real estate portfolio worth, dare I say, about $1.5 million and still growing today. And so he's going to share some of his story and his journey and help us take our business, our real estate to the very next level. Help me welcome to the stage, the incredible, the amazing, Mr. Dr. Axel.
Hey, Michael. It's nice to be here.
Absolutely. Welcome to the show, sir. Doctor, how are you?
Very good. Thank you. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us on the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. Sir, your story is phenomenal. You have an incredible mind. Your bio is extensive, and you could do anything you want as a retired Air Force officer. You could have done anything you want, gone into any industry, any field, starting successful businesses. Why real estate? What inspired you to invest in real estate?
Well, as you mentioned in the intro, Marcus, the first part was twofold. Initially, as you can imagine, as an Air Force officer, you're being moved around every 2 or 3 years. And every so often you run in a situation where you basically initially maybe have wanted to rent a house because typically, you know, when you're in a little bit more authoritative role, higher rank, then it's not ideal to live on base housing. So typically for me, it was always find a place somewhere in the community, which I also like because I like the connection between the community and the base that is close by and the military component of it. But every so often you come into a situation where what you're looking for, you can't really find on the rental market, and you're kind of encouraged to say, well, but there's this nice house I could buy, right? And so that happened to us a few times. And even though they try very hard and it's gotten better over the years, as long as I was in the Air Force, there were always circumstances where sometimes your assignment was cut short or was extended a little bit. So it wasn't necessarily always plannable when you move to the next assignment. And what happened in those cases sometimes was, and I mean, this is a time period of 22 years. It's not just, you know, a few years. So in 22 years, it happened a few times that we got orders to move, but it wasn't really a good time to sell a house that we had lived in while we were on station. So a few times we decided, you know, why don't we keep the house rented? And then, you know, when things change a little bit, you know, .com bust, you might remember, you know, the stock market crash, everybody was worried about the economy and things like that. Or in the 90s, there were some times where interest rates suddenly popped to a crazy level and all these kind of circumstances. So we dabbled a little bit in that to see how is it when you own a property and put tenants in it. And then, as you mentioned in the intro, when I started my own consulting company, I started looking at, okay, where or what do you do when you're on your own to do something for your retirement? Because I always knew this is kind of like my second career, but it will have an end at some point. And looking at that, I thought, well, would it be stock investing? Would it be, annuities or stuff like that? And keeping in mind, I started the business in 2005, and shortly after we got into all this financial crisis stuff, that led me to think, you know what? The one thing that seems to be actually more safe in a sense is, if done well, is real estate. And so we started investing in real estate, and we actually started buying properties more when there were so many properties due to the financial crisis and this whole mortgage stuff on the market. But that's what got me into it, was initially to say, okay, the military kind of let me dabble in it. And then when I wanted to find something as a retirement system for my own business, that's how it started.
Makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. And so your company is called Ideal Wealth Grower. Tell me about that and what your company specifically does. Are you looking for investors? Are you doing capital raising? What's the specifics behind Ideal Wealth Grower?
Right. So, I mean, we've turned it into a company. Ideal Wealth Grower is also now a registered trademark, I can proudly say. So what we actually do, and what I've found is, as I was growing my own portfolio of properties, just with friends and former colleagues and people I worked with in my consulting, you have conversations. I mean, more so before the pandemic, but always have conversations. What are you doing outside of the immediate task that's right ahead of you? And we had oftentimes conversations where I said, oh yeah, I'm working on closing on this property and this and that. And people got kind of interested and said, I've never heard about this approach. And I'm living in a really expensive area that would never work for me because I never considered that I could do this out of state. And so from that, what we do basically as a strategy, we call it the out-of-state turnkey residential real estate investing strategy. And I know that's a mouthful, but what it actually means is, if you happen to live in an area that is relatively expensive, where you wouldn't really be easily able to buy properties close by where you live because they're too expensive or rents are not high enough, you go out of state somewhere in an area where the ratio between the rent and the price of the properties is still reasonable. And then you're using what's called a turnkey provider to help you acquire and manage that property. And what we basically also, that's the residential part, favor are residential properties, which means single family homes, duplex, triplex, fourplex, because they have particular aspects to them from a tax perspective and otherwise that the government is really helping with, and it has the biggest market that you could ever ask for in case you ever were to want to sell one of those properties. So if you take all those things together, that's how this started. And then in a nutshell, the ideal is an abbreviation. And if you like, we can go through what that means in a nutshell. Then wealth is what we want to grow to reach our, what I call, time freedom point. And grower is kind of what we do, because we have kind of two options. Clients that are interested, or people who are interested to join our strategy, I provide mentoring to them, basically taking them by the hand and introduce them to my lender, to my insurer, to the places that I buy properties from, and so forth. Or the other option is that they can basically learn about the things, by all the stuff that we're putting out. We have like a free downloadable mindset manual. We have a YouTube channel with all kinds of information on it. And then basically just get those introductions, but without any further help. And then there is a way that typically some of these organizations have referral fees. Kind of like an affiliate.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And his YouTube channel, y'all, for those who are watching the live interview, is Ideal Wealth Grower on YouTube. So very, very powerful. Thank you, doctor. Thank you for breaking that down so delicately. What's the best way for someone who's either interested in getting started in real estate? What should they do first? How did you get started? Let's start there. How did you get started in real estate? How did you acquire the necessary capital to buy your first duplex or to buy your first or second rental? How did you acquire the money for that?
Well, it kind of started in a way by looking how that was for my own residence. Because when I first was in a situation to buy my first residence, the lender, or the bank in that case, said to me, okay, you have to decide how much you're going to put down, because that will determine if you have to pay mortgage insurance or not. And I was completely unfamiliar about that at the time, but he explained to me, if you put at least 20% down, and that is still true today, then you don't have to pay mortgage insurance. So what it meant for me when I started looking into this as a retirement plan, as an investment that has positive cash flow, I confirmed, is that still true? And to this day, it is still true. If you buy an investment property, you put 20% down, there is no mortgage insurance, right? So that's because mortgage insurance can be a pretty expensive component to your finances. So basically, to get started, if you go to this traditional example, and I'm tempted to say, I always used to say, let's take $100,000 house, although I realize more and more as prices have increased that it's harder and harder to find the $100,000 house. But it's an easy thing to use for calculations because people can follow the numbers, right? So be aware, you might probably more likely find a $130,000 or $150,000 house these days that works. But for the easy calculation, you think about a $100,000 house you want to buy somewhere in the Midwest. That would mean to have 20% down payment, you have to bring $20,000 to the table, right? And so that's basically the answer to how do I get started is, do you already, because you are somebody who likes to save, have $20,000 you can use? Or do you have saved and invested in other things, maybe your 401k plan, or you have made some investments in the stock market or into Bitcoin, or you have some gold coins that you inherited from grandma, whatever it may be. If you already have $25,000, you can start right away. The other thing that we oftentimes do when somebody comes and says, I want your mentorship, like you asked earlier, is to say, okay, let's look and do kind of what I call your personal balance sheet. What comes in every month? What are you paying for every month? What are the things that are absolutely unavoidable? Like, for example, if you rent, you have to pay your rent. If you bought a car on a lease or on a loan, you have to pay it. And food and those kind of things. And hopefully there's always a little bit left that people call disposable income, right? And how much how much of that are you willing to put into a savings account, or I call it the accumulation account, right? And if you say, well, I can do $500 a month, then it's going to take a certain amount of time until you get to 20,000. If you can do 1,000, then it takes less time. And the more you can put, if you had zero, you can figure out, if I need to get to 20,000 roundabout, how much time will it take? Right. So in most cases, I've rarely found anybody who is interested in real estate investing say, I have absolutely zero. Now, there are some hidden places, right? Like I mentioned, if you may have inherited something, you may have some things that if you're really, really motivated, you could turn into money, or you may have had your employer for years putting money in a 401k. And some people listening will probably immediately throw up their hands and, oh, I'm not going to take the money out. I'm going to get a fine and stuff like that. And if you like, we can talk about that. To me, I understand that fear because that's what the media is pumping into our heads, but it's unwarranted. And it's actually, in a sense, pretty silly if you go one level deeper than the surface.
Absolutely. We will talk about that. We have one quick commercial break. Dr. Axel, y'all, you guys stay with us. Stay tuned. Stay engaged. We'll be right back. Good day, podcast listeners. This is your boy, Marcus Norman of Gentleman Style Podcast Show. I wanted to let you guys know that we will be rolling out a new feature and adding a join sponsor button next to the subscriber button here at the bottom of your screen. Once you click the button, it will display 3 membership levels. Gentleman Gentry, which is our entry level, Duke Duchess, which is our season level, and the Emperor and Empress, which is our most sophisticated level, which you will receive unique perks and benefits at each differing level and gain access to our community tab. We will also be sharing polls, upcoming events, and interviews, as well as receive feedback from our sponsors directly. Your support helps me find new and exciting guests to bring to the stage live. Well, in order to get the higher end speakers, it requires, some You guessed it, money. So thank you for tuning in to my channel. And if becoming a sponsor sounds good to you, then select the join button below and choose your desired sponsor level. Let's continue to grow and serve the future of generations of men and women to come. Love you guys. Bye. Dr. Axel, y'all. You guys are tuning in to an incredible powerhouse speaker, and this man is breaking down the real estate industry and how you can overcome your fears of getting started. And he's sharing how he went from military officer in the military to how he realized that he needed to make a change and make a difference. And real estate was the way he gained financial freedom and financial success. And he's here to help you, help us, help me take it to the next level and get there through real estate investing. Doctor, you brought up a great point earlier, and I think it's buried in your story. You used a 1031 exchange to survive the recession. How can people use the 1031 exchange to survive any pandemic, any recessions, and take what they currently have and roll it into an investment vehicle? Is that where you were going with it, or am I way off?
No, you're not way off. I don't know if I would say we've survived the recession because of it, but one thing that people sometimes are concerned about, I found there are two points in the journey, so to speak, where there are concerns. The first, it's like the Mount Everest of all concerns, is how do I get started and not make a mistake, right? And this is a little bit psychological because everybody says, purchasing a house is your biggest investment of your life. Now think about it, like we are doing it basically on a regular basis. We want to try to add to our portfolio at least one or maybe two per year, right? So if that is the biggest thing ever in life, as you can imagine, that kind of also triggers some people to say, oh, I gotta be so, it has to be perfect because this is such a big deal. I can never make a mistake on it, which leads to analysis paralysis, right? People can't really get off the point of the stool, of the chair, whatever, and really get moving. And like with everything, the more often you do it, and hopefully, like that's why I created Ideal Wealth Grower, is to help people to overcome this initial hesitation, that fear to make a mistake, especially when it's a property far away that you don't occupy yourself. So that's the first one. And then the second one is, in a sense, to say, okay, how do I handle it when we go through a phase where the economy is doing really well and equity is accumulating in my property, and now somebody makes me an awesome offer. So let's just take an example, and this is kind of in a way what happened to me. I had, after my military service, been asked to take on an executive role in a software company in the Santa Barbara area. And we got there in 2011, and if you remember a little bit on the time, we got there in 2001. Actually, sorry, that was right around the .com bust. Yeah. So investments and stuff were down. Real estate was not necessarily doing great, and so the prices were somewhat suppressed. Now that's kind of like a joke in the Santa Barbara area, because what's suppressed there and anywhere else it's still pretty crazy, right? But anyways, so we were able to get a basically brand new built house at the time. And then in 2010, as my business had grown, we realized that it was harder and harder to do that in a relatively small town that is mainly focused on students because of two large universities and tourism. And my business is consulting for corporations, and there aren't that many big corporations in the area. So we knew we had a lot of equity in our house, but if we had sold it, then we would have had to pay capital gains taxes on that gain, right? Because we didn't live in the house anymore. That's a lot. The big thing that people sometimes forget. If you live in your own residence and you sell that and you have a gain, then the government gives you $500,000 of gain that you can keep tax-free. But if you moved out of your property and you kept it, like we started out our conversation, why did we have some properties that we didn't occupy ourselves? Then if you sell that, then the government says, if you made a profit on that, we want you to pay taxes. And the 1031 exchange works in a way where you say, okay, I'm selling the house and I'm getting, quote unquote, a profit, but I'm not going to put the profit in my pocket. I'm willing to use the profit to buy one or more other properties in exchange. And that's also where this term exchange comes from. So you're basically exchanging the existing property that you're selling for one or more other properties. And there are just two rules. You can either sell in one location and buy something very similar in another location for a similar price, and then that way keep the profit. Or you can sell in one location and buy other properties like we did out of state, and they cannot, as a total group, have more value than twice the value of the house that you sold. So let's just say you sell a house for 500,000, you cannot buy more than 999,000 worth of more properties in a cheaper location. And so that's exactly what we did. We used the profit from the sale of that Santa Barbara house and bought a couple of properties in the Midwest. And you don't have to pay any property tax on the gains, capital gains tax on the gains. And you can keep exchanging. So theoretically, I'm not saying this works for everybody, and you want to definitely have a really good CPA who knows real estate investing. But theoretically, you can keep doing this. You buy a property in an up and coming area, it grows in value really well. You exchange it for the next one in the next up and coming area, and so forth, and grow your portfolio that way over time. And then even your heirs can take over the properties, and there is an adjustment process so they don't have to pay the profits that would have maybe accumulated over 20, 30, 40 years, right, if you started early. So that's a really, really cool process. And the reason, if you want to, Marcus, let me know if you want me to explain, why is this even there? Why does this even exist?
Absolutely. I want to educate the audience a little bit. So the benefit, you guys, to the 1031 exchange, the reason why that's powerful and the reason why the good doctor broke it down and he used it is because typically traditionally you want people buy, sell. Every time you buy a property and every time you sell that property, you've made a profit. If you sold it and there's equity in the profit, and if there's equity in the property, when you sell the property and you receive that check, you have to pay taxes on that gain. And so because you have to pay taxes on that money, the next property you buy, you have less capital to invest with. And so when you go in, so 1031 exchange allows you to keep all of it and take the entire lump sum and defer the taxes and take the entire amount. So if same example, if you have a $500,000 house, let's say it's paid off, you don't have to pay taxes on that $500,000, and you can take the entire amount and buy another property, and you didn't lose any of the capital, any money to buy the next property. So I wanted to break that down. But yes, good doctor, I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt you at all.
No,
but I wanted to break that down.
You're totally right, Marcus. And for the audience, I think it's important. What Marcus just explained is perfectly correct. But there's an additional little thing that can grow to quite a bit of money. And that is the repayment of depreciation. And what that means is when you own a property that you don't occupy, it's called an investment property. So you have tenants in it that pay the rent and pay down your mortgage and everything. So like Marcus said, you get your house paid off. Every year, your CPA or your tax preparer will depreciate, meaning like take a little bit of the value of the house and write it against your taxes. And if you sell that property, it's not only, like Marcus said, the capital gains tax that you have to pay, but you also have to repay, give the government back that depreciation. So when you do the 1031 exchange, you basically get two benefits. Number one, you can keep all the money as long as you exchange it for something similar than what you sold, and you don't have to give back the depreciation. And on one deal, unless it's a really big one, you might say, well, in some cases there might be, reason to say, I want to keep the money and pay the taxes. But if you think about a really longer period of time, and we hopefully get to this point, I'm always talking about the time freedom point, where we don't need to exchange time for money anymore. And this is typically anywhere between 10 and 15 year or more time horizon, depending on where you start and what your financial situation is. And if you look in those terms, then it's very likely that you wouldn't just do one exchange, but maybe multiples. And if you then compare that, both for paying taxes on the gains plus repaying the depreciation, it can come up to a pretty substantial amount. And if you keep exchanging, you're saving yourself those two things, the profit taxes, so to speak, capital gains taxes, and the depreciation repayment each and every time. And that's why it's such a powerful thing. And you may have heard the Biden administration had pointed that they might actually want to change that. And pretty much the whole real estate investing industry kind of exploded and tried to lobby against it. I haven't heard about it lately anymore. So maybe they had some success in setting the thing straight, because it would really be a very bad negative impact on people who want to use real estate investing. And you have to ask yourself, why would the government actually offer something like that? Well, if it's really true that providing space for people to live with private means, then if you get punished for doing that, if the government says every time you make a profit, we want taxes, keep in mind the money that you're using to make the investment is already in most cases taxed money. You made an income, you pay taxes, whatever is left is what you use. Now the property made a profit, and the government potentially would want to come and say, we want to make it even harder for you to keep a profit and keep growing your portfolio by taxing the already taxed money that you invested. That makes it less and less attractive for people to do this. And you have to ask yourself, okay, so if private sector would step back and not provide not just single family duplex, triplex houses like we do, but even apartment complexes, because the same thing applies there too, then who is supposed to provide shelter and housing for the public, for those people who cannot or currently cannot afford to buy their own place, right? So it would really make no sense to say we want to make it harder when we're already all across the country struggling to have enough housing for people.
True. Very true. Dr. Axel, y'all, this is huge. We have one more quick commercial break. You guys don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Are you a local business looking to offer your customers easy access to cash without having to travel miles? We're here to help. At Norman Legacy Investments, we provide free ATMs with free installation that provide a suitable investment for your business. Even better, we offer you some profit sharing and handle everything from start to finish. Just reach out to us today to schedule a free consultation.
Welcome back, y'all. This is Marcus Norman of the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. And today, Dr. Axel just broke down the 1031 exchange and how that is a powerful vehicle to take and add into your tool belt. But that's what we want to do here. We want to fill your tool belt with all the different tools, and his company is doing that. He has a podcast, and his company is helping you do that, and they mentor, and they've built their own real estate portfolio through education and through mentorship. And so stay tuned, stay engaged. And if you missed any of that, tune back in and check that out. It was a powerhouse of information. He is a wealth of knowledge. Doctor, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to touch on that. What is the time freedom point? Because you teach to this, you mentor to this. Can you break down what is the time freedom point?
Right, yeah. So the time freedom point, if you imagine how would you like to have a life where you're no longer required to exchange time for money. And exchange time for money, if you think about it, the vast majority of people would call that a job, or maybe nowadays multiple jobs, right? You go and work somewhere 40 hours a week or sometimes even more, and you get a certain amount of money back. That's exchanging your time, the most valuable thing that you have in your life, and that you can't make anymore, you can't get anything back. That's what you're exchanging in return for money. Now, that during that time, you're using your smarts, experience, all of that is fine, but it is your time. Your employer expects you to spend the time, and then they pay. So The vision is to say, how can I create a life where it's up to me, where I have the freedom to determine what I want to do with my time? And if I really love what I do in my job, then I might continue to do that or more of it. If I feel like what I'm doing in my job is mainly to support myself, my family, my kids, whatever, financially, but it's not necessarily, and I think this is happening quite a bit in the last few years, that people realize, yes, I'm in this career, but it's not really my passion. It's not really fulfilling. And the longer they're in it, the more they realize that. And they oftentimes have to suppress certain passions, right? I would love to have more time for gardening, like me, that's my hobby. Some people would love to travel. Some people would love to paint or to do music or whatever kind of things, and aim to reach some level of mastery. And what we all know, typically, if we want to reach a level of mastery, you need to have time to practice, right? And so with that, time freedom point means how long in the future, where is that point on the calendar in the future where I can generate enough passive income so that I have the freedom not to have to exchange my time to make active income. And passive income, if you go back to our investing, is if I take my example and say I find a property somewhere in the Midwest that meets the performance criteria, meaning like $100,000 house pays me $1,000 rent per month. That's the starting point. Now, over the years, it can increase and probably will increase in rent. But if I have that scenario right now with the low interest rates, I'm making anywhere between $200 and maybe $300 a month in positive cash flow from day one. And so if you say, okay, well, what does that have to do with the time freedom point? If you find in today's dollars, you would need to make $3,000 to be able to have the freedom to say, I only work half time or I don't work at all anymore. $3,000 covers what I need. Well, then you also know, theoretically, you would need 10 of those $300 houses to get those $3,000. Now, because it's on a timeline from today, anywhere between 8, 12, 15 years into the future, and you will have increases in rent for each of those properties as you accumulate one after the next, it's more likely that it's not 10 properties, but probably more like 8, right? Which is why I said in 8 to 12 to 15 years, if you can buy one of these properties every year, you will get to, if that's your time freedom point number, $3,000 a month. Now, if the number is higher, you can save more and then put more money aside in your accumulation account so that you can buy more properties. But you also want to realize these $300 that come in, you really want to only start using them when you reach that time freedom point, let's say in 10 years from now. So right now, you might be putting $1,000 a month in your accumulation account for 20 months, and then you have your first $20,000 and you put those into your first property. As soon as that is yours, $300 come in every month. So you put your 1,000 plus 300. Then maybe 15 months later, you buy the next one. Now you get another 300. So it's your 1,000 plus the 300 from the first one, plus the 300 from the next one, and so forth. So the amount of money that you're basically accumulating leads to the fact that you can buy more properties faster and faster. And ultimately, you get to potentially buy 2 properties per year. And as you can say, even if they never increase in rent and you were only always getting those $300, sooner or later, you will reach that time freedom point where it's up to you to say, I can still go to work for a few more years, but I know anytime my boss screws around with some weird kind of demands or wants me to come in on weekends and stuff, you can say, you know what, man, or woman for that matter, it was nice here, but I had enough. I have the freedom to decide what I want to do with my most valuable asset, my time.
Love that. Love that. Thank you for breaking that down, Doctor, for so delicately. And what I hear in the midst of you saying that is mindset. That to get to that place, to get to that level of accountability and responsibility and taking charge of our lives requires a mindset shift. And you teach to this and you mentor this. Why? And that's what makes you unique. And that's what makes Ideal Growth Wealth Grower a unique strategy and a unique concept because you focus on mindset. Why the focus on mindset? Can I ask your opinion on it?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, thank you for mentioning this. I mentioned earlier that I wrote a mindset manual that people can download for free from the website. The thing that I find, especially when we first started, is that a lot of people, I mentioned this analysis paralysis and this mountain to overcome to get started and so forth. And all of that, most of that comes from feeling like you are the victim of your life circumstances, of all the things that are going on as they are happening to you. And what I want people to understand is that you want to leave that behind and see your life and what you do as the creation of your activity and the creations of your mind. So you get into a creator mindset. If you create the future that allows you to ultimately have the freedom not to work anymore, then that's your creation. And mine looks different than yours, looks different, than Marcus, and everybody has their own, because we have a little bit of a different thing of what we like, what our vision is, how we envision our life. That's to get from the victim perspective to the creator perspective. I always encourage people to write what I call write a letter to yourself, imagining day by day for 2 weeks how your life would look like in, let's say, 5 or 10 years. Most people struggle a little bit with 10 years, but even if you take an intermediary step where you may not have reached your time freedom point, but 5 years in the future, and think really, I say, when some people say, but what about this? What about that? I say, imagine you have a little jar and that has fairy dust in. And every time while you're writing that letter, there is a moment where you say, but as soon as that but or any kind of hesitation comes in, imagine you open that jar and sprinkle a little fairy dust on it and it goes away. And with that said, right, you're sitting down and you say, what if I were to do these things? If I were to purchase these properties, if I were to actually get my personal balance sheet in order, if I were to really be clear of what I want, what would I do when I actually have the freedom after I reach the time freedom point to do with my time what I want? Would I travel? Would I paint? Would I garden? What would I, look after the kids? Whatever it may be for you. And now start to describe a week or two in this life, starting Monday morning, I'm getting up out of bed. A month after I reached my time freedom point, or a year after I reached my time freedom point. And as you do that, it becomes a strong, strong motivator to say, now that I wrote it down, now I can see it at least in front of my inner mind, my inner eye. And then with our help, with my help and my team's help, we can help you to keep that energy going. And what's kind of interesting, just as a kind of like maybe a capstone on that thought, is initially, like I mentioned, it is very hard for people to overcome this initial, hesitation to make a mistake. That's the Mount Everest of the initial first move. And then when they actually see that it works and they have bought one property and then bought the second property, it's almost, and I'm hesitant to say it, but it's really true, it's almost like an addiction where we then become oftentimes the people who say, no, don't just jump on everything. Just, people start not eating anymore, not drinking anymore, not going out anymore, just to put more and more and more money into the accumulation account. You still want to have a life, right? So why you on the journey? So we actually switching the whole paradigm from first pushing and encouraging and motivating you to kind of moderating your speed so that you don't go crazy. But the cool thing about it is when people have had the opportunity to see, I am creating my future. I am making the decisions that lead me to my time freedom point. I can see that it sounds like in our day and an age where everything is instant gratification, 8 years, 10 years, 12 years is so far away. But think about it. If you are 30 years right now, and I come to you and say, how would it be if you don't ever have to go back to work for somebody else unless you really, really want to at 42? Then that becomes a little bit, and even if you're 40 and you say, okay, well, if I don't ever have to work again at 50, while I know that everybody in my age group probably has to work to 70, that should be motivating, right? And it's not that you can't do any work, it's more like you have the freedom. And to get to have that freedom, you have to have a creator mindset and not feel like a victim.
So true. So true. Doctor, how can people connect with you? How can we grow with you? How can we learn more from you and get on board? The train has left the station, but it's not too late to hop on board. How can we connect with you and my audience grow with you?
Well, one thing is you can go to our website and we have like a little button there where you can schedule a call with me to see if I'm the right person for you to help you or answer any questions. What I would love for people to do that are in your audience, Marcus, is to check out our YouTube channel. You can become a subscriber, you can leave comments, and if ultimately you come to the conclusion, hey, this looks really good and I would like to go a little deeper, then just either write me an email or use that button on the website. But we're really trying a lot of education material to put out there for free on the YouTube channel. And I know that a lot of people get intimidated by all this lingo and all these weird terms and stuff like that. So every week, twice a week, we basically bringing out new information for free for anybody who wants to just find out a little bit of what we do and how we do it.
Love that. Love that. Check him out on his YouTube channel and the website and help grow with this movement. Again, get on board with what the great doctor is doing. Doctor, I want to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to support and give back in this way. This has been impactful and very informational, and it's necessary. You are necessary. So I want to say to you, from me to you, don't ever give up, because we need you. We need what you're doing. We need the information. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Marcus. Thank you for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, my audience, for tuning in to the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. I hope this message has been impactful. I hope it's been powerful. And I hope it is helping you realize that you can and you will take your business to the next level. And so, like I always end every show, take care of your families, take care of your friends, and take care of business. This is Marcus Norman of Gentleman Style Podcast Show and Dr. Axel and his company and his podcast, Ideal Wealth Grower. Check him out on YouTube and where you get your audio and video. Love you guys. Bye.
Bye.